The same exact thing is done with prison statistics in America. A majority of criminals that have committed really terrible crimes identify as religious. And like a really tiny minority of people that have committed the same crimes identify as atheists. And that's totally true, but there's a lot less atheists in the world.
First of all, this claim is only ever made in percentages, e.g., 2% of the general American population in 2012 classed themselves as atheist, whilst only 0.02% of the prison population in 2013 classed themselves as the same. When you are dealing with the percentages of two demographics, population size is irrelevant. This is a basic part of math which you, as a college student, should know.
Hey folks, I have an announcement to make. After having found out that Hitler was a Christian, I, as of today, am declaring myself an atheist. Yeah, right.
As an ex-Christian who came to be when they, as a young Christian, began to question the story of the Bible both from an ethical and empirical standpoint, I'm not really interested in your faux reaction upon discovering the facts that Hitler was indeed a Christian. I'm more interested in how you can say Hitler was a terrible person when their crimes pale in comparison to the supposed crimes of your proposed all-just deity. That is where it gets interesting as our reactions differ.
This little-known historical fact about Hitler had a lot to do more with his political relationship with the church. His speeches often pandered to religious audiences in order to gain some kind of political support. "I am doing the Lord's work." That's a highly popular quote that critics like to throw at Christians that Hitler actually said.
So from this we can take away that regardless of Hitler's personal beliefs, everyone should acknowledge the fact that Christianity formed the basis for Hitler's call to action, not just with the war but also the stain on human history, which was the Holocaust. But tackling the idea that this was simply a political tool, I like to call upon his more private conversations with only his inner circles. I of course refer to the Hitler's Table Talk. Now Christians like to reference a specific quote stating, "I shall never come to terms with the Christian lie. Our epoch will certainly see the end of the disease of Christianity. It will last another 100 years, 200 years perhaps. My regret will have been that I couldn't, like whoever the prophet was, behold the promised land from afar." End quote, as evidence against the very notion that Hitler was indeed a Christian. The problem? This is redacted. This comes from the German to French to English translation of the quote, and each time it has been translated, it has lost some of its meaning, changing the quote entirely. Thankfully, we have the German to English translation at our disposal. This direct and more accurate translation states, and I do quote, "I have never found pleasure in maltreating others, even if I know it isn't possible to maintain oneself in the world without force. Life is granted only to those who fight the hardest. It is the law of life. Defend yourself. The time in which we live has the appearance of the collapse of this idea. It can still take 100 or 200 years. I am sorry that, like Moses, I can only see the promised land from a distance." End quote. As we can see, the redactions change what was clearly a devout proclamation of Hitler's Christian faith and his regrets that, like the Christian prophet Moses, he would never see the world he longed for into an attack on Christianity. Again, these were the private minutes of time spent out of the public eye, so why he would feel the need to lie at this time lacks justification. So how about we just put to rest the myth that Hitler only proclaimed the Christian faith when talking in public to rally support from Christians in Germany. Hitler was not merely a devout man, he believed his works to be analogous to that of the prophets, remembering that who the Nazis referred to as the Jews were not the Hebrews and the Israelites of the Old Testament, but those that the Nazis believe had broken faith with God in rejecting his avatar. Hence, they still refer to the prophets and the peoples of the Old Testament with high regard. They saw the contemporary Jews as the Cain to Christianity's Abel.
Sam Harris went so far as to say that the Holocaust was a result of hundreds of years of tension built up between Christians against the Jews.
How is this going further exactly? The European anti-Semitism prior to the Nazi rule of Germany is a well-documented fact. There are depictions inside of English churches of Jews sacrificing children to perform blood rituals dating back as far as 1114 Common Era. That's nearly a millennia old. This is something known as blood libel, a long-running Christian practice of accusing the Jews of not only kidnapping Christian children, torturing them and sacrificing them, but also poisoning wells, bringing disease upon the town, and host desecration. The latter part of which, if you did not know, refers to the maltreatment of the bread supposedly transformed into the living flesh of Christ, which kinda hammers down the facts that, yes, Christians were a big part of this. The pagans sure as hell didn't care about some Jews apparently stabbing some bread. Things only got worse during the Black Death, since Jews and witchcraft often got melded together with the whole blood libel thing, opening them as targets. Move on to the mid-Renaissance, and need I bring up Shylock? The fact is, all of this left a lasting impact, and anti-Semitism barely lessened in Europe over the next several centuries as each region went through cycles of anti-Semitism, which the church was always front and center to cash in on, since they were thought to offer spiritual protection from the dark forces, including the Jews. If you deny this, you deny so much of European history that I could only pick a couple of examples to highlight in this video. I could sit here for days explaining how certain nations outlawed open practice of Judaism, or how they were secondary targets during or after numerous wars and revolutions. This is not hotly disputed history. This is very basic stuff. Now, I understand that you are an American, but if you want to cast doubt on what someone else has said, then I, as well as others, will expect you to do some basic form of research.
And according to his argument, even if the Nazi regime wasn't religious, the leader was, so he forced his agenda on the rest of his followers.
No, you have their point entirely backwards. Even if Hitler had not been Christian himself, as evidence suggests rather plainly, he still adopted Christian rhetoric to rally the German people behind him to justify the Holocaust and pacify dissent.
This little-known historical fact about Hitler had a lot to do more with his political relationship with the church. His speeches often pandered to religious audiences in order to gain some kind of political support.
The fact that he could do this using Christianity is a sign of how ethically rotted Christianity is at its core. The Bible calls for genocide repeatedly, perhaps one of the most infamous cases being the slaughter of the Midianites in Numbers chapter 31. And the intention of this was a total purge, so much in fact that when members of Moses' army took slaves, he asked them, quote, "Have you allowed all the women to live?" he asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has ever slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. End quote. Note that this was still genocide, even though the virgin girls were spared to become sex slaves, to be raped by the Hebrews at their leisure. I say this because of the understanding of heritage at the time. The Hebrews only cared about the male lineage. They had no understanding of genetic heredity as seen in Jacob with his cattle in Genesis chapter 30. Therefore, to uproot the family tree was to slaughter all men with a certain name or a certain tribe. This idea of genocide changed as understanding towards genetics grew, but the general principle is the same, and as we can see from here and elsewhere, genocide is entirely biblical.
This argument is the critics' attempt to not only discredit Christianity, but also try to prove that it does more harm than good.
Actually, this mostly comes up in one or two ways. First, and perhaps most common, is the Christians' attempts to declare every dictator of the 20th century an atheist to show how ethically void atheism is. This is even though atheism isn't an actual thing, it's an absence of a thing. We can then go through and point out how Hitler was a Christian, Stalin reformed the Russian Orthodox Church to justify his actions, and dictators such as Mao deified themselves. It may not have been classical monotheism, but it was theism nonetheless. The second way this comes up is when a Christian attempts to portray Christianity as this ethically superior foundation for morality which atheists supposedly steal from to base their own morality on. I simply point to the Christians' model of morality being forwarded and compare it to the identical model used by the Christian Adolf Hitler and ask why you uphold yours as superior yet decry his, even though both are Christian and both are the same. What I'm getting at here is that it's typically a response to what Christians say rather than a launching point itself.
But it's a bit of a stretch.
What's a stretch? The fact that the Holocaust is entirely wrapped in a millennia of Christian blood libels against the Jews, the fact that most Nazis were Christians leading up to and during the war, the fact that the Bible unquestionably sides with the application of divine genocide, or the fact that Hitler was operating off the same morality you were. Which evidence point is a stretch?
It doesn't surprise me that critics play around with these ideas, and I definitely think they should, because they should explore different ideas about religion and surrounding it. It does surprise me that this argument is actually so commonly used against Christianity. There is no evidence to show that Hitler was actually a Christian, and if he was a hypocrite.
Well, there clearly is, as already supplied in his private conversations with his inner circle, yet how is he a hypocrite? He literally states that he sees himself as leading Germany towards a promised land like Moses, who, as noted, led multiple genocidal skirmishes throughout the Bible under the supposed will of God, who themselves often partakes in the mass slaughter of the completely innocent. See both the Genesis floods and the Exodus Passover for more. Where is the hypocrisy? This is simply a paper-thin no true Scotsman. The Bible sides with Hitler, not you.
It is clear, though, that Hitler's act of genocide was driven by evolutionary rhetoric.
What is evolutionary rhetoric? I assume you're on about evolutionary science, i.e. the evolution of biological diversity via means of natural selection, an observed mechanism of our universe that does not postulate any course of action, nor does it touch upon eugenics via means of artificial selection. So unless you're about to pull out some completely unheard of argument with valid reasoning behind it, you're already sunk. You just don't know it yet.
When he identifies certain genes as superior and other ones as inferior, and then uses that as a basis for why we need to eliminate the inferior genes, he is demonstrating natural selection.
But he didn't identify certain genes as being inferior to others. He asserted that a certain ethnic group, i.e. population with shared heritage and migrational history, were inferior. I, for one, didn't realise that the Nazis were mapping out everyone's genomes during the Holocaust. Fact is, this is still artificial selection, i.e. removing traits perceived to be unsavoury. This is about as far from natural selection as you can get. Natural selection doesn't care about your personal perception, as it's not a conscious entity. At its base, natural selection is simply put, those who survive may pass on their genes. It doesn't care how you do it, it doesn't care about your history, it doesn't care about your geography, your migration, nothing like that. And because of that, diversity is the prerequisite of natural selection, since we don't know what challenges our species shall face in the future. Evolution goes beyond the individual and looks instead to the survival of the species. Now, someone may take issue with those who have sickle cell anemia, calling them sickly and a cost to our medical system, and thus seek to erase them from our species. Let's say that they succeed. Suddenly, malaria and similar diseases have evolved a much wider range. The chances of our species going extinct have increased exponentially, a fact worsened in how people with sickle cell are more malaria resistant. You see, by reducing genetic diversity, as with all forms of artificial selection, you are not increasing the chances of that species surviving. That's why so-called purebreds or pedigree dogs have any number of ailments. Likewise, populations of wildlife which have been segregated into small communities, as with African reserves, can suffer the same problems, which is why conservation programs actively shift individuals about to maintain genetic diversity. And it affects all life, even the humble banana, as seen with the Panama disease. Once a disease evolves to attack one member of a genetically bottlenecked species, it evolves to attack them all. So you see, Hitler was not a fan of natural selection. If they were, then here is what they would have done. Waited. If they had truly believed that they were biologically superior to other ethnic groups, nature would have selected for that. Instead, they resorted to fear campaigns involving narratives of the other coming in and outbreeding them to justify violence, and even then, they still lost. By all accounts, Nazi fascism is a trait reserved for losers from both a political and evolutionary standpoint.
Now hold on, my point is not that evolutionists are Nazis. Actually, quite the opposite. Don't make that argument. Like, ever. My point is that making tiny connections to something that everybody identifies as bad is a terrible way of arguing.
So because you can assert a non-existent connection between evolution and the Holocaust, whilst I on the other hand can demonstrate an active connection between Christianity and the Holocaust, both arguments are equally bad? That's not how reasoning works. Likewise, when a Catholic throws out the assertion that homosexuality promotes and harbours paedophilia, my response in pointing out how not only do all Christian denominations have a history of child rape, hell is in the Bible as already quoted with numbers, but that the Catholic Church literally harbours said child rapist, their assertion is not on par with my evidenced demonstration.
The same exact thing is done with prison statistics in America. A majority of criminals that have committed really, really terrible crimes identify as religious. And like a really tiny minority of people that have committed the same crimes identify as atheists. And that's totally true, but there's a lot less atheists in the world.
First of all, this claim is only ever made in percentages, e.g., 2% of the general American population in 2012 classed themselves as atheist, whilst only 0.02 of the prison population in 2013 classed themselves as the same. When you are dealing with the percentages of two demographics, population size is irrelevant. This is a basic part of math which you, as a college student, should know. Secondly, the specific statistics I just mentioned were put together in this way by the Freedom from Religion Foundation in their 2013 article titled, "Still Convinced Atheists Are Bound to Be Bad People? Survey Reveals Only 0.02 of Prisoners Identify as Atheist." Note that this is once again a response piece created to dispel the myths thrown out there by Christians and people of other religions.
Not only does this argument not do anything to determine whether or not Christianity is true or false, it also doesn't matter. Because being messed up is a human thing, not a philosophical worldview thing. And that's it for this video. So thanks so much for watching, thanks for arguing with me, and I'll see you on the next one.
I don't know if you knew this, but ethics is a field of philosophy. But as for testing the validity of Christianity, which declares itself to have some ultimate or objective morality, given to it by an all-just deity. Showing otherwise would refute Christianity, since it refutes one of the core concepts of said religion. Sure, there could be something similar, so a religion centered around a deity that doesn't claim to be all just and all loving, etc. But that would not be Christianity as is typically claimed by Christians, including yourself in this video. You clearly asserted that Hitler would be a hypocrite were he to be a Christian, when no. You are the hypocrite. You proclaim Christianity, yet you ignore the word of your apparent all-just deity in claiming that Hitler would be a bad Christian for supporting genocide, when no. Hitler was not simply a Christian, but genocide, completely biblical. Well, hello there. I just wanted to say a few things here at the end of the video before you go. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has ever donated to the channel via Patreon, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Trevor Mathewson, Andrew Spreitzer, Matthew Kovac, John Sconrock, Alexander Williams, and of course Daniel Martinez. Your support has ensured this channel its ability to grow over the years. I'd also like to ask that you comment down below and like the video, as well as subscribe and follow Essence of Thought on Facebook. Please also consider following Atheist Alliance International on Facebook, an organisation dedicated to helping atheists around the globe. Last of all, I'd like to request that you treat the person I responded to in this video with a reasonable degree of respect. Whilst we understand that there are justifiable limits to said respect when tackling certain heavy topics, and anger can be of a genuine emotion in fighting injustice, any comments utilising language which insults others on the basis of perceived gender, sexuality, ethnicity or ability, both mental and physical, will be removed and the commenter may be blocked on the moderator's discretion. Let's keep this space one which upholds the humanist values. Thank you for watching.